Over the last decade, retail investors have aggressively chased solar panel makers, wind farm operators, and electric vehicle companies. They've driven valuations in the renewable sector to astronomical premiums. But this mainstream market chatter is completely ignoring the physical reality of how a national power grid actually functions. India's rapidly expanding industrial base is ravenous for continuous power. In June 2023, the nation's peak electricity demand hit a record 223 gigawatts, and that consumption trajectory is pointed steeply upward as artificial intelligence data centers and mass railway electrification come online. The prevailing assumption is that intermittent renewables can shoulder this entire burden, but solar and wind only generate power when the weather conditions are perfect, resulting in capacity factors that hover between 20 and 30%. To make them reliable enough to keep the grid stable at night, you need complementary utility-scale energy storage. Right now, the battery chemistry required to back up a grid of India's size simply does not exist at an economically viable scale. The national grid requires uncompromising, around-the-clock baseload power. Nuclear energy is the marathon runner of the power mix. It delivers clean, continuous electricity 24 hours a day, operating with a capacity factor frequently exceeding 92%, completely independent of the weather. Then you have the physics of fuel density. Renewable projects are intensely land-consuming, which is a massive hurdle in a densely populated country where land acquisition is notoriously complex. Nuclear operates on a different scale entirely. A single kilogram of uranium fuel produces 20,000 times as much energy as the exact same mass of coal. A single, highly concentrated facility can power entire megacities. When you combine the sovereign commitment to reach net zero emissions by 2070 with the need to power 1.4 billion people, scaling the national grid to 100 gigawatts of nuclear power by 2047 is an absolute engineering requirement. For over half a century, India's civil nuclear sector operated as a strictly walled garden. Under the Atomic Energy Act, only the government-owned Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited, or NPCIL, could own and operate power plants. While they maintained a strong safety record, relying entirely on public investment starved the sector of the aggressive capital deployment required to scale quickly. The critical inflection point arrived with the passage of the Shanti Act in late 2025. This legislation shattered the decades-old state monopoly. It opened the nuclear power sector to private corporate participation and allowed up to 49% foreign direct investment. Private Indian businesses can now legally engage in financing, constructing, equipping, and jointly operating nuclear facilities. The government immediately backed this regulatory liberalization with capital. The 2025-26 union budget explicitly allocated 20,000 crore rupees for a new nuclear energy mission. To capture the lion's share of this multi-trillion rupee capex boom, you need a diversified triad of specific market leaders. We are looking for the sovereign utility pivot in its balance sheet, the default heavyweight builder pouring the concrete, and the precision engineering anomaly holding a monopoly on the core components. The investment landscape for the Indian nuclear supply chain today is akin to buying the foundational infrastructure of power plants right before the explosive electricity demand of the 20th century. The most significant returns are captured by allocating capital right now, before the broader retail market catches on to the order flows. There is a persistent myth among retail investors, but nuclear power is too expensive to be commercially viable. This stems from the history of legacy nuclear construction. Traditional plants are bespoke monoliths, requiring massive on-site construction operations that can easily stretch past a decade, severely degrading the internal rate of return for private financiers. Small Modular Reactors, or SMRs, fix this broken financial model. Instead of building from scratch on site, SMR components are standardized and factory manufactured in controlled environments. They are then transported for rapid on-site assembly. This factory-based manufacturing model drastically reduces upfront capital costs and condenses construction timelines. The government's new 20,000 crore budget allocation is heavily concentrated on exactly these units. The Department of Atomic Energy is advancing specific indigenous designs, including the 220-megawatt BSMR-200 and a highly compact 55-megawatt microreactor. The explicit goal is an aggressive construction timeline of just 60 to 72 months from the receipt of financial approvals. These compact reactors open up entirely new, highly lucrative markets. Tech companies projecting a surge from 1 gigawatt to 9 gigawatts of AI data center capacity will require the absolute reliability that only a nuclear baseload guarantees. Meanwhile, energy-intensive heavy industries like steel and aluminum are actively modeling captive SMR deployments directly on their factory premises. By shrinking the physical footprint, compressing the build time, and lowering the financial risk premium, SMRs transition nuclear energy away from a sluggish government program and turn it into a highly investable, corporate-driven asset class. When the Indian government decides to construct a nuclear reactor, Larsen & Toubro is invariably the primary architectural and engineering force on the ground. L&T is the undisputed leviathan of Indian infrastructure, aggressively executing massive engineering, procurement, and construction contracts across the nation's entire nuclear fleet. Their dominance in the heavy nuclear sector is absolute. L&T is the only organization in all of India possessing the capability to manufacture the highly complex roof slabs required for prototype fast breeder reactors. These slabs require flawless stainless steel fabrication, with flatness tolerances of roughly 12 millimeters across a massive 13-meter diameter. But their deepest moat is in material science. A reactor pressure vessel must withstand immense internal pressures, extreme temperatures, and decades of intense neutron bombardment without suffering from microcracking. To achieve this, L&T partnered directly with the Bhabha Atomic Research Center to co-develop the Apurvaya grade steel, an entirely new class of metallurgy. Because L&T co-developed the foundational alloy and the precise forging technologies required to shape it, they have virtually guaranteed their position as the premier default supplier for the entire upcoming pipeline of BSMR 200 and SMR 55 pressure vessels. You cannot disrupt this industry from a startup garage. Manufacturing mission-critical components where failure means catastrophic radiation release requires decades of institutional knowledge, extreme metallurgical precision, and rigorous international safety certifications. The switching costs for the government are simply too high, leaving L&T firmly entrenched as a natural monopoly. While L&T handles the macroscopic world of pouring concrete and forging containment vessels, MTAR Technologies governs the microscopic. They are a highly specialized niche player, situated at the absolute precision engineering core of India's nuclear sector. MTAR manufactures the mission-critical mechanical components that sit deep inside the reactor core, including the intricate control rod drive mechanisms. The precision required here is absolute. They are engineering parts where tolerances are measured in fractions of a millimeter. A mechanical failure in these control systems could lead to a catastrophic runaway reaction. Because the stakes are so high, the government will never swap out a trusted supplier just to save marginal costs. MTAR has been deeply integrated with the Department of Atomic Energy for decades, creating an impenetrable vendor lock-in that secures their future revenues. When you look at the stock, a trailing price-to-earnings ratio of 173 ostensibly appears very expensive. However, institutional investors are actively pricing in the guaranteed growth of this specialized order pipeline. Corporate management has explicitly guided the market to expect profound momentum, projecting year-on-year revenue growth in the range of 35 to 40%, commencing in 2027. The most critical metric for surviving a lengthy, capital-intensive infrastructure cycle is the balance sheet, and MTAR boasts an ultra-low debt-to-equity ratio of just 0.24. This remarkably clean foundation ensures they can fund massive working capital requirements internally to execute their growing order book, without resorting to dilutive equity issuances or taking on punitive high-interest debt. As the standardized heavy water reactors and the new small modular reactors roll out, MTAR's high-margin precision components are positioned for a decade of uninterrupted compounding demand. A state-of-the-art nuclear reactor is nothing more than a multi-billion-dollar concrete paperweight if it doesn't have a secured supply of enriched uranium. Unlike wind or solar, nuclear energy is inextricably bound to the physical extraction and processing of a hard commodity. To eliminate stranded asset risk during a global uranium scramble, India has orchestrated a masterful geopolitical hedging strategy. They recently executed a massive $1.9 billion agreement with Cameco in Canada for long-term baseline fuel security. To avoid over-reliance on the West, they are aggressively diversifying into Central Asia, securing physical deliveries from Kazatomprom in Kazakhstan, the world's largest single producer. With the fuel supply locked down, constructing the plants is only half the equation. The state needs an operational vehicle with a massive balance sheet and the expertise to integrate that baseload power seamlessly into a continental grid. This brings us to NTPC. Historically, this utility titan has been synonymous with coal-fired thermal power. Facing immense pressure to decarbonize, NTPC is aggressively pivoting its colossal balance sheet toward nuclear energy. They formed a strategic joint venture with NPCIL, named Ashvini, to bypass regulatory friction, securing a major stake in upcoming domestic reactor projects. NPCIL simply does not possess the operational bandwidth to reach 100 gigawatts by 2047 alone. By accumulating positions in NTPC, investors acquire a highly profitable, dividend-yielding utility monopoly that will serve as the primary financial vehicle securing long-term power purchase agreements for the nation's clean energy future. However, allocating capital to this space requires a rigorous examination of the execution risks. Nuclear power infrastructure is notoriously difficult to build on time and on budget. The Kudankulam project in Tamil Nadu serves as a stark warning. Faced with intense local social resistance, Unit's 3% cost overrun. Then there is the specter of strict nuclear liability. While the government explicitly promised parliamentary amendments to make the Civil Liability Act far more supplier-friendly, the legislative process is complex. Political gridlock could mean actual private sector purchase orders won't physically materialize on balance sheets until late 2027. Constructing nuclear capacity is an extremely front-loaded endeavor. If smaller companies build capacity using high-interest debt, delayed orders will rapidly destroy value through crushing interest payments. This chart shows how our three specific equities navigate this reality. When you map patience required against balance sheet safety and economic moats, L&T, NTPC, and MTAR occupy the optimal top right quadrant, possessing fortress balance sheets to outlast a decade-long gestation. This transition isn't a quarterly event. If your horizon is under 5 years, avoid this sector. For compounding generational wealth, the strategy is aggressive accumulation. The physical construction of a nuclear plant takes years of grinding effort, but the financial repositioning of smart institutional money is happening today. By securing stakes in the utility titan, the heavy construction monopolist, and the precision engineering bottleneck, you position your portfolio perfectly ahead of the largest, most lucrative capital expenditure wave in India's economic history.